Lulu Gaboo and our sports headlines with Figileli Mwati.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Lulu. Good day. Gabon's leader Brice Oligui Nguema has named a new cabinet after his landslide victory in a presidential election in April. President Nguema, inaugurated this past weekend, has said he will boost agriculture, industry and tourism in the oil-dependent economy and fight corruption. Prior to his election win, Nguema seized power in 2023 from the Bongo family that had ruled the Central African nation for over 50 years. The World Health Organization says Sierra Leone has accounted for half of Africa's confirmed mpox cases this week, adding that the West African country is fueling the outbreak. The UN health body, which first declared the emergency in August last year, says mpox remains a public health emergency due to the continuing rise in the number of cases and the geographic spread of the outbreak. The Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said Sierra Leone reported 384 confirmed cases in a week, representing 50.7% of all the continent's cases. The US has announced that it is cutting $50 million in aid to Zambia's health sector due to the country's failure to address the systematic theft of donated drugs and medical supplies. The decision was taken after repeated warnings to the Zambian government to safeguard vital drugs meant for the country's most vulnerable patients. Zambia's health minister, Elijah Muchima, thanked the US for its generous support while saying that the problem of theft predated the current government, which took office in 2021. The US cuts are separate to the sweeping foreign aid freeze announced by President Donald Trump in January. The Southern African Catholic Bishops' Conference, SACBC, says the appointment of Cardinal Robert Prevost as the 267th Pope is interesting. Prevost, who was elected yesterday, has taken the name Pope Leo XIV. He is the first American to hold the position. The CACBC says it is significant that he took the name Pope Leo, as he shares some values with Pope Leo XIII. SACBC Secretary General Father Hugh O'Connor says Pope Leo's leadership style is different from that of his predecessor, Pope Francis.
Pope Leo XIII is especially remembered for two things. Firstly, for his awareness and his ability to read the signs of the times. He is also known as the Pope of the Rosary, and he raised the Basilica of Pompeii. So I think there is a recognition in his election that he has the skill to be a man who reads the signs of the times, but also a man deeply rooted in Catholic spirituality.
This week marks the 100th anniversary of the elevated status of Afrikaans as an official language. However, the story of the origins of the language goes much deeper and further back than the past century. Literary expert Professor Hein Willemse says the origin of the spoken language dates as far back as the latter part of the 1500s. He says the first written Afrikaans can be found in the early 1800s and was penned by Islamic scholars.
The first Afrikaans writings, or the first Cape Dutch Afrikaans writings that we could recognize as something called Afrikaans, for instance, those writings were in Arabic Africa. That was Cape Dutch, written in Arabic orthography. And today that is generally recognized. And it was written up in the Cape madrasas, the Cape religious schools, and I think that played a major role in the development of, for us today, of recognizing that importance, recognizing the history of Afrikaans as a varied one.
For any news stories you would like to share with us, please do send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I'm Cholani Tulo Mwebe.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
In our sports headlines, Cricket South Africa has appointed Shukri Conrad as the Proteas men's all-format head coach. And the defending Africa Cup of Nations champions Senegal kept their title defense alive with a hard-fought victory over DR Congo. I will be back with these and other stories at the bottom of the hour.
Africa Update with Lulu Gaboo, 12 to 1 p.m. Central African Time.
It is 12:06 Central African Time, and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. Thank you to Jwalani Tulongwepe and Figile Lungwati with our news and sports update. Now, join us in conversation on our social media platforms. That's on X, Instagram, and subscribe on YouTube at Channel Africa 1. On Facebook at Channel Africa. You can also send us your comments and voice notes to +2763 as 406-9126 #Africa Update, and let us know which country you're in. And if you have any stories that you'd like us to highlight or to focus on, send us an email. It is newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or give us a call on +2711 714 4459.
Africa Update on Channel Africa.
A major conservation charity linked to Prince Harry has admitted that human rights abuses were committed by its rangers in Congo-Brazzaville. This is following an independent review into allegations made by members of the Baka community against African Parks rangers. An investigation into reports of atrocities was carried out by Omnia Strategy LLP, a London-based law firm, after complaints by Survival International and a major report by a UK newspaper, The Mail. Survival had been calling on African parks to put a stop to years of abuse by their guards against indigenous Baka people whose ancestral land has been taken over by Odzala Kokua National Park, which is managed by African Parks. And to discuss this further, we have on the line Jonathan Mazoa, a communications director at Survival International. Jonathan, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Now, how did the abuse allegations come to light, and how long has this been going on?
Well, they've been going on for years, and African Parks have known about them for years because Survival International has been telling them, and obviously their own staff on the ground will have known about it. So there isn't actually anything new that happened, apart from the fact that last year Survival International wrote to Prince Harry, who was the president of African Parks and is now on their board. And it was only when we wrote to Prince Harry about these long-standing abuses, and also that the UK newspaper The Mail on Sunday did a major investigation and expose of them in the press, that African Parks were basically forced to take some kind of action. So it had been going on for a very long time, and they've known about it for a long time, but it was only the kind of media exposure that really forced them to do something about it.
And what have the Baka people said? What did they tell the investigators?
Well, the investigation that African Parks commissioned after all this media exposure has not been made public. We urged African Parks to promise to make the results of the investigation public, and they refused to do so. But all that has been made public is African Parks' response. So all we and anyone else know outside African Parks of what the investigation found is based on what African Parks have said in their response. But in that response, they have admitted that the investigation has uncovered multiple abuses that took place. And as I say, none of this is actually new. So the Baka have been saying for years and years to us and to anyone else who visits their communities and is there on the ground, that the rangers employed by African Parks have been beating them, abusing them, in some cases raping them, basically committing horrific atrocities. And the reason all this is happening is that this national park, Odzala National Park, was created on the Baka's ancestral homeland, and the Baka were then excluded from that area and now live outside it. And so, like many national parks across Africa and Asia, the indigenous people, the Baka people, when they try to go back into the park to use their resources from their own lands, they are beaten, persecuted, abused, raped, and so on. It's very important to note that this is not a particularly unusual case. The same thing is happening across Africa and Asia, where national parks, game reserves, and other protected areas have been created on indigenous peoples' lands. And the model of conservation that is employed here is that once the national parks are created, the indigenous people are forced out, and these areas are then protected by heavily armed rangers and eco guards who basically use a kind of regime of fear and intimidation to keep out the very people whose lands these parks have been created on.
Now, Jonathan, why are the governments or the decision makers with regards to these national parks? Because clearly nothing would have happened. The national park wouldn't have been created without the go-ahead from the governments of these different countries or different parts of Africa and Asia. Why are they not called out to take action on what is happening to the indigenous people of the land?
Well, the conservation industry is not only extremely powerful, but also very lucrative. So in most of these cases, the model fits in very well with government priorities because it also allows large areas of, for example, in this case, the Congo rainforest, to be exploited for logging and mining and so on. All these activities which governments generally favour happen in tandem with the creation of national parks and protected areas over basically small bits of the forest, usually the particularly biodiverse and rich areas of forest where the indigenous people live. And so tourism, for example, is promoted in these national parks. And governments, it fits in very well with governmental priorities. The big conservation organizations like African Parks and like WWF and the Wildlife Conservation Society, who all have the same basic model, they are $1 million organizations. They pour money into these places. They fund very often the rangers who patrol these areas. All these things suit the governments very well. And as I say, the basic model it's part of a patchwork often where you have national parks, game reserves and so on in some parts of the forest, while you have logging and mining going on in others. And very often the logging companies, for example, are also funding the conservation organizations to create and patrol these national parks because it frees up large areas of the forest for their logging activities. So the whole model is very destructive of the rainforest, very destructive for the indigenous peoples whose lands have been taken, and also often suits governmental priorities very well.
Now, what is your appeal as Survival International?
Well, what we're appealing for is very simple, which is simply for international law to be upheld, because under international law, indigenous peoples like the Baka and many others across Africa and Asia where this same thing is happening, they have the rights to their lands. It's as simple as that. These are lands where they have always lived. They have guarded them. They have managed them better than anyone else. Their successful management of these forests is precisely the reason that outsiders want to protect them, in inverted commas, by turning them into national parks. But we're calling not only for indigenous people like the Baka to be allowed to return to their ancestral lands, but for the conservation industry as a whole to fundamentally rethink how it approaches conservation, because the indigenous peoples are the best guardians and managers of these environments, and the wildlife can only thrive if the indigenous peoples are there living on their lands. It's their management and custodianship of these areas that have produced these incredibly biodiverse areas in the first place. If you exclude the people and fence them out and turn these areas into some kind of so-called pristine areas, which are in fact nothing of the sort and heavily used for tourism and so on, you're destroying the whole basis on which this incredible biodiversity has been built up in the first place. So our appeal, alongside the indigenous peoples themselves, is for them to be allowed to very simply live in peace on their ancestral lands, and for that to be recognised as the basis for successful 21st century conservation.
Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us on Africa Update. We'll leave it there for today.
Thank you.
That's Jonathan Mazoa, Communications Director at Survival International, joining us on the line.
Darubini ya Afrika na I am Henry Shakif.
Jumuiya ya maendeleo ya kusini mwa Afrika SADC imeanza kuondoa vikosi vyake vya kulinda amani kutoka maeneo ya mashariki mwa Jamhuri ya Kidemokrasia ya Kongo DRC kupitia nchi ya Rwanda. Hii imekaje?
Kinachojionyesha sasa, tayari jumuiya ya kusini mwa Afrika SADC imeanza kuelemewa kwanza na gharama kubwa za kuongoza operation za kijeshi kule mashariki mwa Kongo.
Hii inaleta tafsiri gani haswa katika nchi za Afrika ambazo ziko ndani ya machafuko hivi sasa? Hii inaleta tafsiri gani haswa kwa mataifa ya Afrika?
Cha kwanza kwenye diplomasia, tafsiri ya kwanza ni hitaji nchi kutatua matatizo yao wao wenyewe. Mfano kinachoendelea Sudani Kusini, kinachoendelea Kongo, Rwanda, Uganda.
Darubini ya Afrika 11 kamili hadi 12 kamili majira ya Afrika ya Kati.
Africa Update with Lulu Gaboo on Channel Africa.
It is 18 after 12 Central African time, and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. The United Nations World Food Programme, the WFP, and the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, have warned that more than 60,000 malnourished children in South Sudan's Upper Nile state are at risk of plunging deeper into malnutrition as treatment supplies run critically low and resupply efforts are hampered. Intensified fighting along the White Nile River has meant no humanitarian supplies have reached the area in almost a month. The river is the main humanitarian supply corridor into Upper Nile. And to talk to us further on this, we are joined on the line by Ruth Situma, the Chief of Nutrition at UNICEF. Ruth, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Good afternoon, Lulu, and thank you so much for having me.
Now, Ruth, just how dire is the situation in South Sudan's Upper Nile state?
The situation in South Sudan is extremely dire. As you know, South Sudan is one of the youngest country in the world and has continued to face cycles of violence and instability. And sadly, this has resulted to over 75% of the population in need of humanitarian assistance. And for Upper Nile, we see that it is home to 300,000 children at risk of malnutrition, whose lives are literally hanging in the balance, who need urgent treatment every single day to survive. What we at UNICEF, together with WFP and our partners, use life-saving nutrition supplies to treat these children. These supplies means the difference between life and death for children with severe acute malnutrition. And that's why the urgent need for passage of life-saving nutrition supplies is needed for these children. So it's really extremely important, because it means life and death for the children who are not getting the life-saving nutrition supplies. And malnutrition is a big problem, because it's life-threatening. For example, children with severe acute malnutrition are 12 times at risk of dying, and children with moderate acute malnutrition are 3 times at risk of dying if they do not get treatment. So every day without treatment is getting these children to tragedy. And I think no one listening to this would want these children to be in this situation. So for us, really, the need for safe passage of much needed nutrition supplies and the safety of these supplies as soon as they reach Upper Nile is so critical, because it means life and death for those children.
And in terms of time frame, as UNICEF and the World Food Programme, you're speaking of the supply being exhausted by the end of May.
That's right. Actually, if we do not have the safe passage now, it means that we'll not be able to get those supplies to children. And having exhausted supplies, imagine a child who is currently admitted in the program and is supposed to finish up the treatment and is not able to finish the treatment because there's no supplies. So this is what we are facing. And it means that these children will not be able to recover. And that's what we want to avoid, and make sure that we have safe passage and access of the supplies and ensure safety of those supplies.
And just also when you speak of treatment and the need for the treatment and how dire the situation is, in dealing with treatment, there also is that issue of hunger. How do you then administer medication where on an empty stomach?
So this, the beauty is that through working with WFP and UNICEF and other partners, we are providing a comprehensive package. So the comprehensive package is including the treatment component, but also we are providing general food distribution to the population. So it's really a comprehensive package that looks at both provision of the food supplies, provision of, for example, water and hygiene related supplies, as well as also treatment of malnutrition. So it's a comprehensive package, and it's really to look at the needs of the affected population holistically.
Now, Ruth, what do you suggest as a way forward to avert the imminent disaster of thousands of malnourished children?
Our ask is one, safe passage of life-saving nutrition supplies and food supplies to Upper Nile, and also ensuring safety of those supplies once they arrive to reach the children who need it the most, and the children whose lives are solely dependent on making sure that they get these supplies.
So far, have you had any response from, so to speak, those who are, fighting, or the different parties with regards to this request? And what are you hoping will happen? Because if they don't respond, you won't know whether safe passage will be allowed.
We will continue to explore all possible avenues to make sure that our children get the much needed support. We'll continue to knock doors and engage with the different stakeholders at country level to make sure that these the children get the much needed support. So we'll continue exploring every avenue together.
Ruth, thank you so much for your time on Africa Update.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was Ruth Situma, Chief of Nutrition at UNICEF, speaking to us on the line. It is 25 after 12 Central African Time.
Africa Update with Lulu Gaboo on Channel Africa.
The Association of Palliative Care Centres says it would like to dispel the myth that hospices offer substandard care for patients and that people who go to hospices go there to die. This is as Hospice Week is observed in the country from the 4th to the 10th of May. And the week shines a light on the support offered to those with life-limiting illnesses and their families. Sisi Sechalo has more.
The theme for this year's Hospice Week is Passion for Compassion. According to the Association of Palliative Care Centers, this week will be used to demonstrate compassion in communities and to reflect on the compassionate care that hospice workers provide for patients and their families. The association in South Africa says the work of the hospices are often undermined. Interim Chief Executive Officer of APCC is Tessia Berger.
We comply with standards that are internationally accredited. A lot of the facilities that claim to offer palliative care don't have trained staff. So we try and get the message over that our nurses have exactly the same qualifications that any other nurse will have in the private and public sector. And then they do an additional 9-month course with the University of Cape Town, qualifying them to provide palliative care.
Channel Africa caught up with patients and those providing the service to find out what they ought to be doing this week. Sydney Pellman is receiving care at Greendale House Palliative and Hospice Care Centre based in Johannesburg. He says the centre has changed his perception about hospices.
Before I knew and before I came to hospice is the only place I knew is a place you go to before you go to a mortuary. And that was my envision of hospice. That's what I thought hospice is all about, going there to die. And then my daughter's friend, who's a travelling sister, she travels the world. She's in England at the moment giving talks and that. And my daughter phoned her and she says, no, hospice is not like that. And she says, get your dad booked into hospice. You've got all the papers from all the doctors and speak to them. And this is the way my daughter got it arranged. And as I say, when they spoke to the heart and within a day, and the following day I was registered.
Greendale House Palliative and Hospice Care Centre is the first hospice in Africa, having its footprint in many parts of the Gauteng province in South Africa. The Chief Executive Officer of the centre, Jackie Kay, says her centre has doctors, home care nurses, registered nurses, community care workers and social workers. She elaborates further on the work that they do.
We make sure that the person is comfortable. So if you've got a life-threatening illness or a life-limiting illness, we need to make sure that your pain is controlled. That's the most important thing. Many people will die purely from pain because they age, their body just ages that much rapidly. We also look after the symptoms of a person. So in other words, if they are taking pain medication, are there symptoms that happen? Is somebody actually getting more ill on those tablets, medication, and we have to change that.
And that report by Sisi Sikhalo. It is at 12:29 Central African Time, and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. Our news headlines up next with Jalani Tulongwepe.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Lulu. Good afternoon. Making headlines, Gabon's leader Brice Oligui Nguema has named a new cabinet after his landslide victory in a presidential election in April. President Nguema, inaugurated this past weekend, has said he will boost agriculture, industry and tourism in the oil-dependent economy and fight corruption. The US is reported to be working on taking the first group of white South Africans it has classified as refugees from as early as next week. President Donald Trump's administration was reported to be planning to send officials to the Washington Dulles International Airport in Virginia for an event to mark the arrival of the South Africans. And finally, the Southern African Catholic Bishops' Conference says the appointment of Cardinal Robert Prevost as the 267th Pope is interesting. Prevost, who was elected yesterday, has taken the name Pope Leo XIV. He is the first American to hold the position. I will have details on these and other stories at 1 o'clock.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Shalani. We say good afternoon to Figile Lingwati with our sports update.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Good afternoon, Lulu. We start off with cricket news. Cricket South Africa, CSA, have announced the appointment of Shukri Conrad as the Proteas men's all-format head coach. Conrad, who has led the test side since January 2023, will now take charge of the white ball format, starting with the T20 International Tri-Series against Zimbabwe and New Zealand in July. 58-year-old will oversee the national team across all formats through to the ICC Men's Cricket World Cup 2027, which will be hosted on home soil. This appointment forms part of CSA's broader restructuring of the national team strategy, which includes the reintroduction of the national convener of selection. Conrad's next assignment will be the ICC World Test Championship final against Australia, taking place from the 11th to the 15th of June at Lord's in London. And in football news, the defending champions Senegal kept their title defense alive with a hard-fought 2-0 victory over DR Congo in their final Group C match at the Total Energies CAF Under-20 Africa Cup of Nations in Suez. Ghana's 1-0 win over Central African Republic in the simultaneous group fixture meant that only a win would suffice for Senegal, who came into the match with just 1 point from their opening 2 games. The result means Senegal will finish second in Group C on 4 points, behind leaders Ghana 7, and will now face Group D winner Senegal in the quarterfinals. It was a spirited display from the Congolese, who had impressed earlier in the group stage with a win over Central African Republic and a draw against Ghana. But their failure to keep a clean sheet throughout the tournament proved costly. World Under-20 400-meter champion Udeme Okon is expected to play a key role in boosting the 4x400-meter relay team's chances of success at the World Senior Championships in Guangzhou in China this weekend. The 19-year-old is widely regarded as the missing link in the relay squad. Last year, the team claimed silver behind Botswana at the World Relay Championships in the Bahamas, securing an automatic Olympic qualification spot. Speaking to SABC Sport, Okon says they know exactly what to do to secure a medal.
I'm obviously inexperienced. I have a lot of experience. I competed at World Juniors for the relay, and my team was good. We got ourselves a silver medal, and now obviously in the senior ranks, we have more experience with the guys. Guys that have been there, know what to expect, and obviously I'm going to get there with my experience and put it in there and get what we have to get.
On to the Olympics now. Los Angeles will become the first city to incorporate 2 stadiums into an Olympics opening ceremony when it hosts the Games in 2028. Both the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum and the SoFi Stadium will host the event on the 14th of July 2028. The Coliseum, which was used at the 1932 and 1984 Olympics, also hosts the closing ceremony on the 30th of July and becomes the first venue to hold events across 3 games. The SoFi Stadium, home to NFL sides, the Los Angeles Rams and Los Angeles Chargers, will host the Paralympics opening ceremony on the 15th of August, with the event closing at the Coliseum on the 27th of August. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2711 714 4459. This is Channel Africa Sport with me, Fidel Lingwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Je, una jambo lolote akilini mwako? Je, una shauku kuhusu masuala muhimu? Na je, una maoni ambayo unataka yasikike? Kweli, hili jukwaa ni la kwako. Piga simu au tuandikie kwenda WhatsApp namba +2 2760552594 na tutakupigia simu.
Mtangazaji wa habari zetu za Afrika Kusini mjini Johannesburg.
Hivyo unaweza kuwa mshirika kwenye matangazo yetu. Sio mazungumzo tu, ni fursa yako ya kuchangia maoni yako na kushirikiana na jumuiya ya wasikilizaji wasikilizaji wanaotamani mtazamo wako. Tufuate kwenye mitandao ya kijamii. Tembelea tovuti yetu www.channelafrica.co.za. Uwe tayari kushiriki na kuchangia maoni yako kwenye Channel Africa. Channel Africa, mtazamo wa Kiafrika.
Africa Update with Lulu Gaboo on Channel Africa.
Well, thank you to Figile Ngwati with our sports update. And we say good afternoon to Tabiso Lohoko with our business news.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thanks, Lulu, and good afternoon. Credit ratings. Moody's says banks in sub-Saharan Africa will not be directly impacted by U.S. import tariffs, but second-round effects, including their impact on the macroeconomic outlook and on China, could still bite. The impact is likely to include higher funding costs and fallout from slower growth in China, which is a big export market for sub-Saharan African commodity exporters. Moody's said this in a recent report on African banks. Ghanaian government's move to revoke Emirates' global aluminium mining licenses stemmed from the company's failure to fulfill its commitment to construct an alumina refinery. Guinea has launched a process to revoke the EGA license, escalating a dispute that began in October with the suspension of the Emirati company's bauxite exports and mining operations. Joel Khodi on this report.
The move by Guinea, the world's largest bauxite exporter, threatens to further disrupt global aluminium supply chains and signals the resource-rich country's hardening stance toward foreign miners as the junta that seized power in September 2021 pushes for more local processing of minerals. A second source within Guinea's Ministry of Mines says that officials had sent a final reminder letter to EGA regarding its refinery commitments, but the company did not respond.
Kenyan telecoms firm Safaricom has reported full-year earnings before interest and taxes of $807 million, higher than its guidance. In November, the company guided that the group EBIT would be between $722 million and $769 million. Safaricom is partly owned by South Africa's Vodacom and Britain's Vodafone. It expanded into Ethiopia in 2022, betting that Africa's second most populous nation would power future growth. Despite strong customer growth, Safaricom has had a bumpy ride so far in Ethiopia due to security, inflation, and currency challenges. Rwanda's finance minister, Yusuf Murangwa, says the economy is forecast to grow at a slower pace this year than in 2024, while government spending for the 2025-26 fiscal year is expected to rise by about a fifth. Murangwa says the economy is projected to expand 7.1% this year and jump to 7.5% in 2026. According to Rwanda's Statistics Office, the country's economy is expected to grow 7.4% in 2027 and 7.0% a year later. The economy grew 8.9% in 2024. Volkswagen's premium brand, which has no production in the United States, is expecting current trade talks between Brussels and Washington to provide some level of clarity over car import tariffs soon. The European automakers are currently facing a 25% import tariff in the United States, the world's second largest car market, causing many of them to pull their outlooks for 2025 and look to Brussels to hammer out a bilateral deal. Audi CEO Arnold Dolner confirmed that a decision around U.S. production will be made this year. The dollar in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira 608. Botswana 13 pula 46, Kenya 128 shilling 345, and Zambia 26 kwacha 75. The BRICS countries in Brazil, the dollar there will cost you 5 real 70. Russia 81 rubles 83, India 85 rupees 35, China 7 yuan 23, and in South Africa the dollar will cost you 18 rand 20. $1 is trading at 75 pence to the British pound and 88 to the euro. A look at commodities markets now. Gold $3,325 and platinum at $984 per ounce. Brent crude oil $63.73 a barrel. For any business stories you would like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business in Johannesburg, I'm Thabisolo Huku.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Africa Update with Lulu Gaboo on Channel Africa.
It is 12:41 Central African Time, and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. Thank you to Thabisolo Huku with our business updates. Now, Professor Mohammed Mohsin Javad, Dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology at the Auric Virtual University of Pakistan, has shared his thoughts on the ongoing conflict between Pakistan and India in the Kashmir region. He emphasized the shift from religious to economic factors as the root causes of modern geopolitical tensions, stressing that nations should focus on sustainable resource use rather than conflict. Professor Javad called on international communities, including the USA, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and China, to play a role in fostering peace. Channel Africa's reporter Michael Mbewe caught up with Professor Javad outside of the recently concluded second installment of the International Conference on Higher Education at the University of South Africa, UNISA, on Thursday.
United Nations is a forum where this whole globe has to sit together and chalk out different issues of the globe. You said that geopolitical. I have another idea, because if you study all the things, geopolitical and economical issue of this globe, I want to draw your attention a centuries behind. At that time, there was the wars and unrest among the countries on the base of religion. So the religion was the first priority. And second level, that was the personal defense. And on third level was the economy. So there are so many wars, battles that based on the religion. But with the passage of 100 years, now most of the wars behind is not political. That is the economics. No, the religion is replaced, is reshaped. So on a first level, there's the economics, and second is the personal defense, as to my idea, and third is the religion. So now the most thing and most the technical thing behind all these issues, except one or two, that is the economical issues. And that economical issue is the base of some geopolitical issues. So each and every country and a nation want to have more access to the resources. So it is the battle to occupy the resources. I'm a professor of science and biology. To my point of view, the nation should think not to occupy the resources. We should think about the sustainable use of those resources. Anyhow, if we are spending monies at the cost of health, as the cost of food, our globe is very beautiful, very handsome. We should not make it ugly. We should send it in a beautiful way to our next generations. So my message is to all where the unrest is, we should realize it should not be the matter of ego. No, the so many things, so many battles are not only the base of the political, that is the base of ego. That exists among countries, that exists among, nations, that among some races. So we should be joined, you and me, if you are a black, I'm a brown and other was the white, but we have all the blood is red.
Indeed, they say blood has no nationality. But on that note, I have seen simmering tensions between your nation, Pakistani, and India in the Kashmir region. This conflict has its origin. It's not the first time that we have witnessed such clashes. Perhaps maybe give us a brief history. To your knowledge, where does this conflict formulate from?
You know that a subcontinent when the colonial rule near to end. In 1947, Pakistan came into being. At that time, there was some issue that remained undissolved by, at that time, the regulators and etc. Kashmir is one of that. And at that time, there is a United Nations resolution that the peoples of Kashmir should give them the right for own decision. Either they want to go to Pakistan, either want to go to India. So that is still undecisive. But after the passing of 72 years, the things are changed. But still, India and Pakistan is now becoming atomic powers. Both have the atomic powers at the cost of the base of good education, at the base of good food and shelters, because both nations have invested just for their self-defense a lot of on such kind of that. So my point of view, the both nations should, because now the Pakistan is a reality. India should feel that Pakistan is now the reality. As to my knowledge, might be, you can say that I am somehow biased because I am a Pakistani. Because as to my observation, India is still not accepting that Pakistan is a reality. There is some ego issues, and India, on the base of, the land is more bigger than a Pakistan. Pakistan is a small country as compared to India. And a size-wise, we cannot compete and all that. But both sides, we have a same blood, same culture, everything is that. But we should realize our responsibility. And that area is also having some resources for other nations. As I have already said, now the battles are basically not based on some, these are the resources. And there's some disturbing factors. We are the neighbors. We should realize our responsibility in some kush. This present tension that exists because, 2 months before, there was a very horrible incidents held in Balochistan. Some persons hijacked a full train and there are so many casualties. And the Pakistani side has said that it is some, indirect involvement of other nations in which they are believing India and etc., their agency like RA and etc. But the same case, few days back, I think 13 days ago, there was another incident that happened in Pahalgam in Kashmir. So the India is blaming that the Pakistani is behind that.
And that was Professor Mohammed Mohsin Javad, Dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology at Auruk Virtual University of Pakistan, speaking to Michael Mbewe.
Africa Update on Channel Africa.
The Mental Health and Gender-Based Conference expected to take place in Namibia later this month is expected to raise awareness, educate, train and share access to resources for successful mental health interventions. The theme of the conference is mental health and gender-based violence, causes, symptoms, impact on society and culturally competent intervention. The event will be filled with practical, valuable tips for recognizing and successfully addressing mental health issues by a team of globally acclaimed mental health experts who will work with local experts to achieve the set objectives. And to talk to us more on this, we are joined on the line by Ifi Nzinwa, President, CEO, Echoes Africa Initiatives, who are organizing the conference. Ifi, good afternoon and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Good afternoon, Lulu. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Ifi. Hope you're also doing well. Now, tell us more about this upcoming conference and what can be expected from it.
Okay, the conference, you already said the theme. It's basically to, raise awareness on mental health. And I am from the United States, and we have been doing this across the United States for years now. And at some point last year, with all the impacts we're making, because what we do is we advocate for culturally competent mental health intervention. Yes, I'm an American, but I'm originally an African I'm from Nigeria. And so we find out that there in the United States that there's a lot of mental health issues among the African immigrants. And even when intervention is done, the results are not as expected. And so I'm a journalist as well. So I started investigating. I'm trying to find out, why is it not working? Why is it working for other people? Other people are not working for the blacks and people of color. So I have this team of mental health experts that I've been working with over the years. And then we found out that it's because when they need intervention and they go to maybe like a psychiatric home or they go to a hospital, they tend to use the same approach. For instance, you have someone with mental health issue who is Caucasian, and then you intervene, and then you bring a black person or an African immigrant, and then you want to use the same approach. It just won't work because you don't understand their trajectory, you don't understand their culture, you don't understand the things they have to deal with, their belief system and all. So we took it upon ourselves to really advocate for culturally competent mental health intervention. We have been doing that, and we try to raise awareness in the community in ways that they can understand. Because first of all, to intervene successfully, people need to understand what mental health is about, understand the basics, and how to even identify mental health issues. And so we have been doing this in the US. So sometime last year, I am African, and so why can't I do this in Africa too? Because we're seeing the results. There's been a lot of results when people began to focus on culturally competent intervention in mental health.
Now,
so we decided this year do it.
What does culturally, the aspect of culture, how big a role does it play in an individual, choosing a mental health practitioner for assistance? Because you find that some people generally don't have a culture, and they just go with the flow. But when it comes to mental issues where a lot of things are brought to the surface, which then goes back to whether it's ancestral issues or cultural issues or background, how is then an individual given the know-how of choosing a mental health practitioner?
So culturally competent intervention is key in the results, on how the results pans out. For instance, mental health experts need to be culturally informed to be able to intervene with someone dealing with mental health issues. So it's everything. And the awareness right now in the United States is so high because they on their own had to agree that the culturally competent intervention is the way to go. For instance, we have in the US, we have an African who came and said, he or she may come from a polygamous home in Africa. Maybe he or she is believe in African traditional religion, and there's a lot of things attributed to someone is after me, or it's somebody my stepfather, my stepmother, and all of that. To people who do not understand that culture, say to mental health experts, they're not able to look at that person, look at the culture, look at the things they're dealing with. They're not able to effectively intervene, because you have to be able to intervene when you understand where your patient is coming from, when you understand the trajectory of your patient. So culturally competent intervention is the way to go. And that awareness has been raised, and particularly in the US, even here in Africa. Culturally competent, for instance, the way you would intervene for a Christian should be different from the way you intervene with a Muslim. You understand?
Yeah.
And even across tribes, because the tribes, their belief system, their practices are different. So when you make an effort to really understand the patient, the culture of the patient, the history of the patient. And so what we have been able to do in the United States is that when people go to the hospitals and okay, this is a mental health issue, they start looking for an expert who is from that region. Or they'll start first, let's say the person is an African immigrant. Okay, they want to start, okay, which psychiatrist or psychologist is African. And then when they get the list, it's okay, this person is from West Africa. Who is from West Africa? When they still get it, they narrow it down. Okay, this person may be from Namibia, maybe from Nigeria, maybe from Ethiopia. And then eventually, if they are not able to get specifics from the country, but someone from West Africa can be able to handle that.
Yeah.
And
now,
so
stigmatization, is still a big challenge on the African continent. What role do such gatherings play in the destigmatization of mental health?
So that's part of the issues that they are going to be discussing at the conference. Stigma and shame is one of the reasons why people don't speak up, why people don't seek help when they suffer mental health. And in Africa, for instance, we still know that a lot of families would rather even hide it from the public, or would rather not speak up, would rather not say and admit that their family members, their loved ones are having mental health issues, even the people suffering. And that's because of the stigma. So everyone, part of the awareness is the fact that we all are even playing a role in the rise in mental health by stigmatizing people suffering from mental health, by shaming people suffering from mental health. So stigma, and we just finished a workshop last month in New York on stigma and shame. Stigma and shame is one of the key things that we need to deal with. And everybody, that's part of the things, their workshops, and we're going to work on stigma, destigmatizing mental health. It's okay not to be okay. It's okay to admit that you're not okay. Seek help, speak up. And they're going to, the part of the workshop is that they're going to tell them, okay, these are the signs, these are the symptoms. When you start feeling this way, separate, these are the times you need to. Sometimes it's not medicine, it's not even the expert. It's really about sharing with someone, and it's sharing with someone who can understand, who can relate,
And
basically.
What sort of response have you gotten so far? This conference will be taking place in Namibia, and what sort of response are you getting, and just a feedback towards the conference?
Oh, a lot of people have actually reached out to us. We put out the information out there on social media, and people have been reaching out. And we were actually overwhelmed with the responses we've been getting from Namibians. The fact that, okay, this is, it's time this is really addressed and brought out in the open. And people have actually been registering to participate in the conference. And the fact that we're doing a whole awareness thing, that's why we're even bringing artists from Nollywood to, just so that these people can talk about, they're open to talking about their mental health challenges, the things, and to make them feel that it's okay to speak up. It's okay. You don't need to be ashamed. It's okay to speak up when you know there is an issue. It's okay to speak up. We're having the Nollywood artists, they're going to do stage dramas and all to get them to understand really how mental health can impact their lives, and how being informed can also change any trajectory.
Ify, it's been a pleasure. We'll leave it there for today. Thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Thank you.
That was Ify Nzinwa, a president, CEO, Echoes Africa Initiatives, who are organizing the conference, which will be taking place in Namibia later this month. You're listening to Africa Update, coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. Continue with us on our social media platforms. That's on X, Instagram, and subscribe on YouTube at Channel Africa 1, on Facebook at Channel Africa. You can also send us your comments and voice notes to +276 4063. That's 406-9126. Hashtag Africa Update, and let us know which country you're in. And if you have any stories that you'd like us to highlight or to focus on, send us an email. It is newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or give us a call on +2711 714 4459. Well, it is how we wrap up today on Africa Update, and coming up at the top of the hour is the upside and the news coming up next with Jolani Tulongwebe from myself and the team on Africa Update. It's been a great time. Let's do this again on Monday. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Lulu. Good afternoon. The U.S. is reported to be working on taking the first group of white South Africans it has classified as refugees from as early as next week. President Donald Trump's administration is reported to be planning to send officials to the Washington Dulles International Airport in Virginia for an event to mark the arrival of the Afrikaners. In February, Trump issued an executive order that called for the U.S. to resettle Afrikaner refugees, describing them as victims of racial discrimination. South Africa's International Relations Department has described the executive order as inaccurate. The U.S. Health and Human Services and the White House are yet to confirm the reports.